Good afternoon. I'll be discussing Theodore Dwight Bozeman's discussion of whether two distinct covenants, a covenant of grace made between an individual and God, and a national covenant existed within the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, for our discussion, first let's start over with a basics of what they believed. Now, the Puritans were Reformational faith. They're not Lutheran, but they believed the Word of God is man's ultimate authority. Salvation is by faith alone. All should be done to the glory of God. Now, how are they to carry out these faiths? Well, they set out to build, as we know, a city on a hill, a community of believers based on biblical principles. Now, as we go through this, I would like to notice that there's an intertwining of the individual and the community. Things aren't going to be separated, but they're going to be together in what the individual is responsible for and what the community is responsible for. So in John Winthrop's Reasons for the Plantation in New England, first and foremost, they wanted to carry out the gospel to the world and provide a refuge for persecuted Christians. Now, why is this? Well, first of all, it's because the Puritans saw themselves as a new Israel. They associated themselves with Israel because they fled persecution, they made a long journey to the New World, and they're given a new land. Now, with this new land, they believed that God established a covenant with them as a people and as individuals together. Now, they drew their beliefs of this concept of a covenant from Isaiah 52:21, which reads, quote, "This shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel." While not Jewish by birth, the Puritans saw themselves as adopted children of God through salvation, so a New Testament covenant, that is similar to the Old Testament, which is applied to individuals within a community. Bozeman describes this Puritan view as, quote, "an entire people chosen and blessed, entitled to preferential treatment defined in terms of chosenness and covenant." They believed that they were a chosen people for a specific purpose to do God's glory. Now, the covenant is simultaneously applying to the individual and the communal in theory. Bozeman describes it as a strong organic connection between self and society, something that cannot be separated. So individually, each Puritan has entered through the covenant through a personal conversion experience. So individually, they are Christians. But man is not an island, and Christians live in a community with each other, so they are, as a whole, a part of the covenant as well. Bozeman describes it, Thomas Cartwright, the founder of English Presbyterian, in his book Treatise, showed God's covenant with Abraham and his descendants, and God's new covenant with individual believers and the church are both individual and communal. So just as God promised it to Abraham and to his descendants, God enters a covenant with individuals inside of the church. Now, the covenant has temporal and eternal aspects. Eternally, God's children are promised eternal salvation through Christ. Now, temporally here on earth, obedience is rewarded with blessings, and disobedience leads to death. So these concepts apply at both the individual and the communal level. For example, the Puritans believed that God could punish or bless the nation as a whole based on the individual actions of its members. So it's simultaneously individual and communal again. Richard Greaves describes this phenomenon in the Origins and Early Development of English Thought as the element of responsibility remains dominant, for participation in the sacraments involves an obligation both to God and to the saints. So you're responsible to God for your actions as well as to your peers. Now, it must be noted that clashes in this practice grew as the settlement grew. Gonzalez, in his book The Story of Christianity, discusses how as people grew older and had children, these babies were baptized to symbolize the Jewish practice of circumcision, but never actually experienced the element of conversion. So as the settlement went on, clashes actually occurred, and this led to the establishment of the halfway covenant, which showed how people related individually and to the community as a whole.